Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second edition of Talmud. This is now we're going to go. Since last time we've all become scholarly. We had a six part about 6 weeks ago. We went through one part of the Talmud, but you don't have to worry. We're not going to penalize you for that.
Okay.
You're still going to be okay. You're still going to be okay. Okay, you know what? So for some it's going to be a little easier because they're already 6 weeks into it.
Yeah, no, it's
6 weeks into it. Yeah, much more advanced.
They get lashes.
The Talmud, yeah. We stop with the lashes. We don't want to hear about the lashes anymore. No more about the lashes.
800 years to catch
What
up.
we want to do. So in the Torah, it tells us that there is within Judaism this principle of private property. We are not communist. The Torah is not communist. It doesn't take away anybody's property. Everybody has a right to private property. Now we know that when you have private property and you own something and it is yours and we're living within an urban situation, there's going to come times when people are going to come into conflict. There's going to be what we call damages, one to another. And how we deal with these damages is a central part of civilization. Because if you want to live in a civilized world, you have to have rules and regulations how you're going to deal with people that damage you. Thank you very much. Okay. You could, we will take care of this after. You know, for those that had no. So this tractate that we're going to be dealing with for the next 10 sessions is called Baba Kama. Baba Kama is two words that come from Aramaic. As I mentioned to you last time at the beginning of our discussion, that much of the Talmud is written in Aramaic. Why? Because unlike the Mishnah, which was written in Israel right after the destruction of the temple till about the year 200 CE, the Talmud itself, the commentary on the Mishnah, the elaboration of the Mishnah was mostly written in Babylon, where the vernacular and what was the common language was Aramaic. So much of the Talmud is Aramaic. So when they set up the system of the Talmud, they set up names for every tractate. So the first tractate deals with all of the blessings we make in the morning. The second tractate is called Shabbos, which of course, what would that be dealing with? The laws of Shabbos. Then the third one is Erevin, which deals with an Erev, a string that you tie around the whole city, so you're able to. The fourth one is called Pesach, which deals with Pesach, and etc., etc. Sukkah, Tainus, Megillah, everything that's dealt with an issue. Then we come upon three that are called Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra. Baba means a gate. And these three, the first gate, the middle gate, and the latter gate, encompass within itself all of the laws concerning damages. It's called Nezikin, all of the laws of damages. Now there's a number of ways to damage people. It's not only, what we're going to be studying about is a pretty straightforward damage. People own animals walk, they damage, you have to pay. Now there are going to be some rules and regulations that are going to be different to what our normal way of thinking is. But, for example, in Baba Basra, in the latter part, we start dealing with damages of partnerships. You have a partnership and one guy does this, the other guy does that, one guy accuses him, one guy accuses that. It's a different kind of damage than we have in a normal, come here, you get banged, etc., etc. In Baba Metzia, we deal with stealing and and agency. If I make you an agent and you're negligent, what kind of damages are you responsible for? I'm leaving town and I say, I'd like you to watch my coffee. And while you watch my coffee, someone spits in it. Okay? Now I come back and I say, hey, I asked you to watch my coffee. So there's a difference. There's a difference if you're a voluntary agent. If you just do it out of the goodness of your heart, you're not responsible for theft or accidents. But you are responsible for negligence. So even if you do me a favor, don't think that you're going to get away with it just so quickly. But if you're negligent, like, you put a sign here, please spit into coffee, then, you're not going to get away with that so quickly. And then there's things called damages. Hezekriya. You own a home that you don't have a beautiful view to the ocean. Comes along a hotel here, decides I'm going to put up a skyscraper and wipes out my view of the ocean. Or, I have a nice little house and I'm, doing whatever I do, and then my neighbor decides he's going to build his house high enough that he looks straight into my window. Now, that's not very comfortable, and that's called hezekriya. That's called damages, You didn't inflict anything upon me, but what you've done is you've devalued my house, the value of my house. So all of these things were discussed in great length, and they come to the final conclusion that if you want to be considered a scholar, if you want to walk around Jerusalem, or you want to walk around Tzvat, or you want to walk around Hebron and be called a scholar, you have to be able to be knowledgeable in the three Babas. You have to know the laws of damages, and it's not only damages, but it includes everything around these things of in partnerships, not only damaging partnerships, how you buy and sell acquisitions, is a big thing. I mean, just because I come to you and I say, hey Mark, I like that sweater, I'll sell it to you, doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean that you have a responsibility to sell it to me now. I have to actually do something and act. I have to take the sweater, give you something, even money, exchange of money played a much lesser role in Talmudic times than it does today. Today you go into a store, you pay money, you take the article, it's yours. The store says, oh yeah, we made a mistake, it won't help you. I mean, I remember when I like to shop around used bookstores, try to see what you have in Boston. It's much better than here. California has good used bookstores, but in Boston, they had tremendous used bookstores. So I found a book that was actually engraved by a well-known anti-Semite, H.L. Mencken. So it was a huge anti-Semite, but he had signed the book and it was $2, and I knew that it was a mistake, even though I felt bad paying the $2. But it was worth about $200, the book. And I came up there and I showed the guy the book, and he opened up the book. And he said, oh, this is a mistake, and I just shrugged my shoulders. It's too bad. This is your advertised price. Once I paid the $2 and I got the book, too bad. That's what it goes. In Judaism, it's not like that. Even if you pay the money, if you haven't actually taken physical ownership of it, someone can retract. Say, oh yeah, I didn't want to sell it. Kahena v'kahena. Okay? The Torah in Exodus goes through a number of different verses in discussing retribution and all the kinds of damage that we're going to be dealing with tonight. And to start off the discussion, we're going to study tonight the Mishnah. So I'm going to hand out these handouts, please, if you don't mind. And we'll start. This is the Hebrew, and this is the English. Now, I'm going to make a suggestion. I know many of us are not fluent in Hebrew, but the Hebrew that we read is very slow. So I'm going to give English translations. Don't worry, I'm going to give the English translations. But I would like, if you can, to just try to follow along with me. Of course, while I'm explaining, look over and read the English and do whatever you have to do. But see if we can somehow be able to follow along in the Hebrew as well.
One for you.
There should be two. One coming from the east and one coming from the west. Okay? Or one coming from the right and one coming from the
They
left.
taught how to read.
I don't want to get political here.
You know the story about
Stayed
the
home
book.
that whole year.
What?
I never
Yes.
figured
The
that.
story about the book.
With vowels.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Sean? I just want to make sure, I think there's one, I'm short one copy.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, you know what? I think this is exactly enough. I think there should be exactly enough copies for everybody except for Paul.
How did you know that?
Is there one more? Did everybody get one in the Hebrew? There's, okay. Did someone only take one copy? I think Ted is sharing. Are you sharing? Everybody has a copy?
There was an English copy with
No. We have one extra copy here.
Sue didn't take the Hebrew.
Who didn't take? You didn't take the Hebrew. Here's the Hebrew. And then there should be one extra. Someone probably is missing an English. I'm telling you right now. Because no?
Yeah, we
I'm
have,
missing English.
Oh. Okay, you don't need. Okay, so we'll take it anyways. Otherwise, I'm going to get confused. I'm a yakim. It has to work out perfectly. It's a set. You're going to buy one shoe? You can't. Okay. So we have like this. Let's get going. Because this tractate is 100 and some odd pages long. And then we don't have much time. Okay? So let's go. This is the Mishnah. This is how we start. Arba'a Avos Nezikin. There are 4 general categories of damages. Okay? Now let me just explain what we mean, because they use the word avot. The second word, right here. Yeah, I'm sorry. We start in the middle of the page. Disregard the right where we have the big fat word of arba. You see that? And all we're going to do is just go down the center of the page. Don't look at the commentaries just yet. We'll get to them in a little while. So he says, Arba Avis Nezikin. There are 4 general categories of damages. Now he uses, the author of the Mishnah uses the word avos, which means, it comes from the word av, fathers. Fathers in general was a term used to denote that out of these general categories we're going to discuss tributaries, subsets. So what the author is trying to tell us is you should know that there are tons of different types of damages, but they could be included, the general sets could be included in these 4 kinds of damages. Now we're going to have to transport our way all the way back to ancient times, because we're not dealing with cars, we're not dealing with electricity, we're dealing with a civilization that is simply everybody owns animals. And the animals are with you inside your house and inside your courtyard. This is not, well, like we live here in Long Beach and you have to have a dog on a leash. Animals are roaming. I mean, they're going around. This is, you've seen movies from the ancient times and you see animals, sheep and goats walking in the street, and that's what's going on here. I'm a homeowner, and it's very likely that I own a couple of sheep and I own this. What you generally don't have are dogs. Dogs were not well looked at in the Talmudic times. Dogs were, Goyim have dogs. The Gentiles have dogs. Jews don't own dogs. Jews own animals that you can eat, right? Oxen, a sheep. So in case you get hungry, that's what we have. And there were rules within Israel what kind of animals you can actually, raise. Small cattle was frowned upon. Why is small cattle frowned upon? Think about this for a second. You want to be Talmudic scholars. Small cattle was frowned upon, while huge oxen and buffalo was okay. You know why? Because small animals roam. They roam more. See, large cattle don't roam as much. So a goat has a tendency to roam. So what happens? Why do we care if they roam more? Because they get lost, they go into other people's properties. Whereas, oxen and buffalo, cows, they tend to be very sedentary. They sit there, all day. They just hang out. You want animals that hang out. Animals that have a lot of energy are not good to be urban pets. You need to raise them outside of the city. But within the city, within the chutzner, within this little community that we live, animals are allowed to stay. Okay? So what are the 4 general categories of damages? Let's discuss among ourselves. The first damage is hashoyer, the ox. Okay? Now what do we mean by a damage of the ox? An ox damages generally 3 ways. Right?
Yeah.
3 ways that an ox damages. Okay? 1 is goring. Now, goring is the most unlikely damage of an ox. We think of an ox as a very scary animal because we've never really come into, how often do we come into a contact with an ox? We want a human ox, but actually an animalistic ox, we don't really come into contact that much. So we're going to learn tonight a little bit about animal husbandry as well, because oxen are generally calm. They're not very excitable animals, except when something happens to them, they all of a sudden they get nervous and they gore.
What is going?
Goring means with the horns, nagach. They gore you, they damage you with their horns. That is an uncommon act. It doesn't happen very, very often. It happens rarely, but that's one kind of thing. Another kind of damage that an ox does, that we're going to get into it, which is the next one, is a shor, so that's one, which is goring. Haboyer, a pit. Now, what does a pit mean? Means that I dug a pit in a public domain. Okay? I was doing some construction. I wanted to put in a pipe or a drainage system where the rain could somehow be siphoned into or whatever, regardless of whatever it was. I dug a pit in a public domain, not a pit in my domain. If I dug a pit in my domain and you fell into the pit, that's your fault. But I dug it on PCH. I went out there one day and I dug a pit, or not only if I dug it, but let's say Mark dug it, and he was a good citizen. He covered it. He covered a pit. And I went ahead, he covered the pit.
Okay.
And
your
then I
ox
went
fell
ahead,
in it.
what?
And your ox fell in
No,
it.
no, no.
Oh,
And
your
I
ox-
went
okay.
ahead and I uncovered, no. Ox is one category.
Okay.
That's one general category of damages. Ox. And that's when the ox gets nervous, it's, it starts to run around the
Right.
street and it gets gores everybody. That's one damage. Pit is another type of a damage. Meaning I basically went out there in the public domain for whatever reason, whether I had the right to do it, whether I didn't have the right to do it, and I dug a pit, and a guy was walking by, and he didn't see my pit, he fell into the pit and he tore his suit. Right? Okay? So the poor guy gets out of the ditch, and his suit is torn. This happened to us all the time, especially when we had new suits for Pesach when we were teenagers or kids. We ran around.
Didn't write in Canada.
We ran around, and you know what? Our parents always provided us with new suits on Pesach. By the time second day of Pesach, it was always a little rip here and there, back and forth. But it didn't happen in a pit. It just happened from other. But a pit is a general category. There's also going to be other examples for a pit. But a pit is a general thing. Or it's two ways in a pit. One, either I dug it or I uncovered a pit. Okay? And someone walks by, falls into the pit. An ox falls into the pit, whatever.
Did you have three categories for the ox?
No, we're going to get back to the three categories of the ox. One is goring. That's what we have to worry about right now. Okay. Now we have category number 3, Vahamave. Tim rightfully mentioned, and when we said the word ox, that how does an ox damage? How? Gores. There's another way an ox damages. You know how? It eats. It goes down the street, and all of a sudden your apple tree is there. The ox sees the apple tree. He doesn't know anything. It says Perelmuter on it. Think it cares. It doesn't care for anything. It says signs, keep out. The ox doesn't read Aramaic. It's from Israel. It goes into takes your apples, eats the apples, and then all of a sudden you're out the apples. This is a common. Okay? This is much more common than goring. Goring is the ox has to get very nervous. Here, the ox is hungry. So it goes there and it, just makes... Oh.
So this is back. So that's how much.
What?
What is not there?
Oh, wait. Vahamave is like a tooth. Eating. It eats your...
This is under the category of the.
That was an ox I called.
No.
No.
This is a second category.
No.
Ox has its... This is category number
Category
3.
three.
This is category number 3. There's 3 separate, because I mentioned to you, goring of an ox and eating of fruit are 2 separate categories.
Eating forbidden fruit.
Eating forbidden fruit. Very good. That's good. That's very good. Okay. Vahamave is eating, or anything that's going to be derived from eating. Give me an example what else would fall into this kind of a category, where an ox would be liable, I as an owner would be liable for an ox that's similar to eating.
Trampling your crops.
Trampling your crops is not like eating, because trampling your crops would be he would pay for the damages, but that would fall into that's the 3rd category of trampling. Think about eating. What does eating denote? The digestive system, but more, it's pleasure, right? It's bringing the ox its pleasure. So what happens here now? It's going to be I'm going to stand up over here. See, okay, I'm going to get up. Here, I'm going to play the part of the ox. Okay? Okay? Now walking around, I see a nice fence that Mark just put up, and the ox goes up to the fence and scratches its back. Okay? Now what's the ox doing now? It's got an itch on its back. It's not goring you. It's got an itch on its back, and it's trying to scratch the itch. But an ox doesn't weigh 100 and, well, neither do I, but let's put it this way. Okay, the ox doesn't weigh, 201 pounds. The ox weighs 2,000 pounds, and while it's scratching its back, the fence falls down. So is this goring? No. You can't consider it goring. Why? Because goring denotes it got nervous, and it got angry, and it ran after you, and it gored you. This was doing it for pleasure. Or think of another thing that the ox would do. Come on.
The restaurant.
Exactly. Renee got exactly it. Exactly what the Gemara says.
Nicely said.
What nicely said. It was very, very nicely said. Ox.
Knew it.
Yeah. That's it's
Digestive.
the digestive system. There you go. Perfect. And then unfortunately your bucket of apples had to be underneath that. All right? See, so if it relieves itself in your property, that's no damages. That's actually a positive thing, because that could then turn into a fertilizer. But if your bushel of apples and the ox decides, you know what, he doesn't like the bushel of apples, I don't think you're going to be selling it very quickly. So therefore, this is called hamaveh. This is called damages that he did out of pleasure. Now, Jerry brings up a good point. Jerry comes up with a third category of damages. One which is not, he doesn't do it out of anger, he doesn't do it out of excitement like goring, because you're going to see that in the rules and regulations, the rabbis are going to rule differently compensation for goring and for eating a bushel. Just to give you an example, for goring, you only have to pay 50% of the damages. So if my ox gores Mark's ox, and he does $200 worth of damage to his ox, all I'm responsible for is $100. I give him the $100 and that's it. That's for goring, and we'll get into the rational in a little while. Eating, if my ox goes and eats up Mark's full bushel, you have to pay full. Because why? Because remember what we said, because one is uncommon, one is something, because responsibility. I cannot reasonably be expected in this particular time to guard my ox against every possible scenario. I just can't. And if Mark went like this to the ox, and you know, he drained him on, you know, he got him nervous, and the ox, he went like with a red cape, and he got my ox nervous, and I'm sitting over here giving a class. I'm supposed to be able to control my ox. So the rabbi said in that kind of a scenario, it's not really rabbinical, it's actually biblical. And in this kind of a scenario where the ox got nervous and it was beyond control of the owner to guard it, I only have to pay half of the damages. But that only, I'll tell you,
Wait. He killed my livestock. I mean, my livestock's damaged. It's
I know it is
gone.
damaged, so therefore you're only going to get 50% of your damages.
Okay, so does it matter who excited the ox?
No.
Does it matter?
No.
So if Mark did absolutely nothing, and you didn't like Mark, and you...
Oh, no, that's a different scenario. If I intentionally, got my ox excited, that's a different thing. But if the ox was walking down the street, okay, and he saw another ox, and he got excited about it.
That time of the year.
It was whatever, he got excited, and he chased the other ox, and he gored it, and it caused $200 worth of damage. You only have to pay $100. For, the caveat here is, the first 3 times. So the Torah says, for the first 3 times that this ox gores, we give you a little break, because we're warning you, because you know what, it was something beyond your capability of foreseeing it, so therefore you're only going to have to pay 50% of the damages. But if this ox does it 4 times, all bets are off. Now you're a chazer. Now you're an irresponsible owner. So you have to pay full damages. But the eating, when it comes to the eating of the bushels of apples, you should have fed your ox. Why didn't you feed your ox, and you let your ox roam around hungry? Then that is something that you could have reasonably be expected to take care of.
But what if you killed? Does the word gore have a meaning?
Yeah, gore is only damaging.
Killing?
Yeah, if he kills another ox.
Well, how about if he kills Mark?
If he kills, oh God forbid, if he kills another person, then the ox.
Mark.
Yeah, no, Mark.
Well, he brought it up. Okay,
if he
so
kills,
what I'm asking is, does the word gore have a meaning that doesn't include killing?
No, there is rules for killing. If an ox kills a human being, the ox is killed. That's the first.
So that's not what this is.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about damages.
Okay.
Damages besides killing.
Okay.
Not killing. It's damage, but it could kill another ox.
Right.
So just take, for example, if an ox, and okay, that's the one thing. Now, we're going to go back to Jerry's statement. Jerry's statement comes in a different category altogether. Now put on your thinking caps here. Jerry's a type of damage, which is called trampling, doesn't really fit neatly in either one of the two. Right? It doesn't fit. It's not goring, because the ox is just walking along, doing its thing. I happen to walk into a hardware store, and I put my pots right on the side of the road just to look into the window. I'm window shopping, and Jerry's ox comes along and tramples on my goods. He just steps all over my goods. So that is not really goring, because he's not excited to do this. It's not really eating because he gets no pleasure out of doing this, it's a third category. It's called the category of regel, of foot. So if an ox goes ahead and kicks you, if an ox kicks you, that's one thing. What is kicking? What is kicking? Damage, but it's the damage of goring, right? It's the damage of goring because he got excited and he saw you down the street and he kicked you. Okay, that's one thing. If the ox ate your bushel of apples, it's called mavir, it's called mavet, it's called tooth, and it's pleasurable. Regel, we're gonna leave now suspended. Let's just leave it suspended for a second.
So does this only apply to oxes? I mean, it has to apply to an ox. It can't apply to, let's say some Michiganer has a lion in his backyard.
Yeah.
And there's guys that no, I'm serious.
It's a very good question.
There's many people that have it in their backyard.
Only an ox.
Cheetahs and things.
This only applies to an ox.
You're kidding.
No, not only an ox, but any domesticated animal. Why? Because remember what I said. What is the rationale behind paying only 50% of the damages? Why did I say it? Why? Why did the Torah say that an ox? Because you can't, because by nature, an ox is a docile animal. It's a calm, it does its thing. Something not so, I want to use the word supernatural, but something different happened, it got nervous. A lion is not by nature a docile animal. So if you have a leopard, if you have a cheetah, if you have a jaguar, they're going to pay full damages as a matter of, because you know that if you're walking around with a lion, there's a very good chance that that lion is going to look at that ox and see supper. Now there's nothing to talk about. It doesn't need to be,
Not interested in apples.
Not interested in apples.
Going back to,
Yes.
we're dealing with animals and stuff.
Yes.
And back maybe to pleasure. Say if you had a donkey, the donkey gets out and somebody got a thoroughbred horse and they didn't want to couple that donkey with that horse, but it happened. Would that be covered?
Where's the damages here?
Okay, there's a damage if you wasted a whole season, you really wanted to have a thoroughbred horse, you didn't really want to have a mule,
Yeah.
but
So you mean the horse got pregnant from the donkey? Is that what you're saying? Or the donkey got pregnant?
either way, but
What
somehow it could come under pleasure, somehow it could come under damages.
Yeah, that's a good case. That I think would come under pleasure. Because that's under pleasure. That's definitely pleasure. He pays full. He definitely pays full in this case.
Is there a section called?
Okay.
You have an air conditioned residence.
All right.
We talked about a dollar value to the damage. How do the two parties agree on what that dollar value is?
How do they agree? They go to court.
I mean, like,
There's a court.
let's say your ox gores me and I was unharmed.
That's a very good question.
To the hole
No.
of my sweater.
Right.
My sweater, it was a $100 sweater.
Right.
At Robinson made 6 months ago, but now it's a
No.
used sweater.
Right. So there's a court. They would all go to court. Court would appoint a estimator, just like we do today, and the estimator would take your sweater, go to the marketplace, hold up the sweater, say, how much is the sweater worth? What's it worth in the marketplace? Let's say
What's
it's
it
worth
before it was damaged?
Yeah, before it was damaged, and now it's worth after it's damaged. So if it's worth $50 before and $30 now, the damages are $20. He pays $20, and that was it. Now it's interesting. What?
That's still goring, although he didn't.
Oh, goring, so you pay half, $10, and go home. Thank you very much. Something like that.
But it's
Now
a sweater. If the ox is trying to gore you, but he gores your sweater.
it doesn't make a difference if he gores your sweater or if he gores you.
Okay.
It doesn't make a difference. You have to pay 50% of the damages no matter what. Now, that's only if an ox does it. You see, that's the kind of only an ox. If I do it, Adam Mu'ud La'ilam, a person always pays full damages. There's no excuse. So if I get so mad at somebody that I pummel them to the ground and the guy gets hurt, I have to pay five types of damages. There are 5 types of damages that are included in a human civil case. One is I'm going to pay for pain. How much pain was inflicted? Second, I'm going to pay for ripui, medical expenses. Nezek, damages that I did. I mean, I smashed my glasses, you ripped my suit, you broke my arm. I mean, all of that's not pain. These are actual damages. If I happen to be a guy that's working on the computer and he broke my arm, I'm like, Shavas. All the things that I have to sit home now, I can't go to work, that's damages number 4. And damage number 5, which I've never seen anywhere around, is embarrassment. Okay? I'm now embarrassed. I mean, the rabbi has to walk into shul with a patch on his eye and with his arm in a sling, with a ripped suit. That's you embarrassed me in public. So for that. Now, when I was a kid learning this, okay, to take Mark's question, how do you establish? Okay, so we all know it's easy to establish how much shevetz is, how much you sit at home, right? Because let's say the doctor looks at you, he says you're going to be out of work for 2 weeks. You make $300 a week, 300 times 2, $600 you got to pay him for shevetz, for sitting home. We all know what the damages is. How do you know what damage is? Because you broke my arm. Pain. How do you estimate damage for pain? So when I was a kid, so they said like this. You know how you estimate damages for pain? So what happened? Let's say I went ahead and I beat up Jerry, okay? And I punched him in the eye. I figured Mark is getting enough with his oxen.
Thank God, Mark's off the hook now.
So now I punch Jerry in the nose, okay? I punch him hard in the nose. What? I mean, how are we going to estimate how much pain is worth? So what do? You go down to the marketplace and you put up a sign. This is what they would tell us as kids, because I remember learning Baba Kama. I think the first time I was 10 years old when we learned Baba Kama for the first time. And they said like this, who is willing to get punched in the nose for X amount of dollars? $1, no, $2, no. If a guy is willing to get punched in the nose for $5, that's how you estimate pain. Okay, so when we were kids, we said, what idiots. Okay, because look how many damages there are. There's burns, there's all different types of things that a person could do to someone else. And we would think, what dumb people lived in the olden times, they'd be willing to get burned. I mean, who in their right mind? Till there was a show called Fear Factor. That answered all my questions. All my questions. I said, you know what? If you live long enough, you see everything, right? You see everything. And I always had this question: which idiots are going to do that? Here you have it. For $50,000, which is a nice sum of money. I'm not putting down $50,000. They'll do anything. They'll do anything, right?
Yeah.
Boxers, other things. All these people willing to take the pain. So right now we have 3 general categories. One is ox/goring. One is pit, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and one is mave, tooth, which symbolizes all pleasurable infractions, all pleasurable things. Then there's hever. Yeah.
About the mave.
Yeah.
So does it have only to be an animal? Can it be also a human being?
Anybody.
Or child or something?
Yes. And that could be. It's just using an example as an animal. But if your son or your daughter goes into someone else's yard and damages, you're going to be responsible to pay. That there's nothing for sure. And then there's hever.
What's the hever and regel? It's the same thing.
Regular foot.
Regel is foot.
Yeah, you had that as a 4th category.
No, regel is a 3rd category. Because mave is shane. Shane is tooth. So mave and shane is the same. So you have goring, tooth, and foot. And foot we haven't really discussed much yet. We'll get into it into the Talmud. We're going to be discussing trampling, what exactly that means. But hever is fire. Chacham. Okay, here's a genius. I call them the Chacham from the Manashtana. When you sit there at the Pesach Seder, you have the 4 sons. You say Manashtana Laila Zeh, so there's 4 sons. This is the Chacham from the Manashtana. I used to call my sons this all the time while they were growing up. Now I'm afraid to. But when I said, you're the Chacham from the Manashtana. What does it mean? This guy decides he's going to now collect all of it's the fall. Not here in California, because these Californians know when my kids were growing up, we lived in the East Coast, in Lexington, Massachusetts. The fall would be gorgeous. The trees would turn, all the leaves would fall down. You'd collect all of the leaves, in your yard. So this Chacham decides that instead of putting it in bags and throwing it out, he's going to burn it. He's going to burn all of the leaves, which happens many times in New England. So the Chacham burns the leaves, but he doesn't know about. He's a Jewish burner, a leaf burner. So he's not exactly the biggest Chacham. And all of a sudden, the sparks are flying everywhere. And one spark flies to his neighbor's yard and burns down his barn. Completely burns down his barn. So you're going to be paying for that. For that is a kind of a damage. Now, so these are your 4 general categories of damages: ox, pit, tooth, and fire. Now, the Mishnah is going to go through a series of questions. Why do we need all these 4 different types of damages for? Right? Because we're going to try to understand what constitutes a damage that is responsible for payment and what constitutes a damage that are not responsible for payment. Because there are going to be some times when things happen beyond our control that, you know what, I might think in my mind that, hey, you know what, I don't really have to pay because whatever happened, you know, go no, an accidental thing. Accident.
Like Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocks over the lantern, burns down
Chicago. There you go. Finished. It's that. So now the Mishnah is going to go through a series of tests to show us why it is completely necessary to enumerate all 4 different types of damages. Because in every one of these damages, I could come up with a rational reason why the guy should not be responsible. Now, ultimately, we know that he is responsible. But in argument, don't forget that we're still in the stages before we come to a conclusion, right? Right? Today, we're grilling the judge. We're grilling the judge. The judge can't say anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm not, because the case may come before me. So you have to think of yourself as a judge before it's been established, before the case has been established. Okay, you know now that goring is punishable by compensation. But if I came to you, I could make a very logical, rational reason why I should not pay for goring. And this is what the Mishnah is going to do now. Why do we have to enumerate all 4 general categories? So let's get to it. So first he says like this. Loi harei ashor. The damages for the ox are not kaharei hamave, like the damages for the tooth. They're different. They're very different. Why? One, he's excited. You know, he's excited. The other one, he's calm, just eating away, no problem. It's two different things. One, I could foresee. If I should have known, you know, you're a bad owner. If you didn't feed your ox in the morning, I should have foreseen that somewhere down the line I have to feed my animals. Go know that my ox is going to get nervous. My ox is going to get excited. It's going to see somebody down the street and going to gore them. How can you possibly prevent that from happening? So therefore, the Torah has to tell us that in this case of exciting goring, you're still responsible, even though you could make an argument in front of the court to say, no, I shouldn't be responsible. Okay? And then he says, "V'lo yarei hamave karei asher," and the damages of the tooth are not like the damages of the ox. Because you may make an argument, you know what? Yeah, listen, my animal went ahead and licked your apples, you know, this and that. You can make an argument, I was hungry, your apples were there. Okay, you know, who knows? Some convoluted way, I should not have to pay. Goring, you should pay because there's actual damages. You're licking an apple, who knows, what knows. Okay, so it's going to say, no, you have to pay even for licking of an apple. Then he says, okay, so now we've come to the conclusion. We've come to the conclusion that if you own an ox, right? You're a homeowner and you own an ox. Now, again, an ox represents not only an ox, but you're a buffalo, a deer, a goat, a sheep, any domesticated animal. But oxen are most likely to gore. Sheep is not really likely to gore, and neither is a goat. But a goat has other different problems. It jumps, it leaps, it gets excited. But if you have an ox, we've come to the conclusion that you are responsible to guard that animal. You have the responsibility. So there's no excuse. You know, there's a class at 7:30, I got to rush to the class, and I forgot to put my ox into the barn and lock the door. Is that going to be a defense in the court? No. You're going to be responsible for the damages. Why? Why? Because the Torah has established that an ox is a moving violation. Okay? An ox is something that goes and by nature is going to cause problems. It's not a pit. Okay? Let's go here. He says, "V'lo yarei hamave v'hakarei asher," and the tooth is not like the ox. V'lo zeh v'zeh, and neither of these cases, not the tooth and not the goring, sheyesh bahen ruach chayim, that they have a living life. You know, they live, they're living, they're alive, they're an animal, they have a soul to them. Karei ha'esh is like fire. She'ein by ruach chayim, that has no living life to it. So why would there be a difference if something has a living life to it or doesn't have a living life to it? Why? Because here's I'm going to make an argument why I should not be responsible for fire. You know why I should not be responsible for fire? Because An animal that has a living breath to it, I contain ownership of it. Why should I contain ownership of fire? What is fire? It's nothing. It sparks. Maybe sparks, as soon as it leaves my domain, leave ownership of my domain. As long as it's with me, fine. But once it's gone, who says I own the fire? Nah. What do you mean, who says you own the fire, Perelmuter? Maybe fire is ownerless, and the poor schmuck that has the, excuse me, strike that from the record, the poor slob that lives next to me, my neighbor, it's too bad. You know what? What happens if lightning strikes his barn? Who's responsible? Who's he going to take to court? God, right? Okay, so let's analyze this. Let's analyze what happened here by fire. I lit a match, and I lit this pile of leaves. What came along?
The wind.
Oh, the wind. So now I have another partner here. The fire didn't get up and marched itself over to my neighbor and planted itself in his barn. No, the wind came, lifted up the spark, took it over my fence, and burned down the neighbor's yard. Why should I be responsible?
But had you done what you should have done and taken those leaves and put them in a leaf burner,
But that doesn't make
match.
no. But I'm arguing that it doesn't make a difference because fire doesn't belong to me.
But there's a reasonable
But
assumption.
you started the fire.
Oh, you're very good argument. All of you people are giving a very good argument. But this is really post facto, because after the fact that we know that Aish belongs to me, I know that the fire belongs to me. But I can make, before we've established it, I can make an argument in court. If the Torah had not said you're responsible for the fire, I could have said, why am I responsible for the fire? Fire doesn't belong to me. Once the wind comes and picks it up, it's in God's domain, and then God has to worry about it. You all agreed with me about lightning, right? No one would say, what are you going to do? You're going to go now and take God to court? A wind comes, it picks it up, boom.
But the first fire wasn't accidental. The first fire had an intention.
Correct. No, you're right. I'm not arguing with you. You're right. You're absolutely correct that I am going to pay for the damages. But I'm just telling you that if the Torah would have just regulated to enumerate just the damages of ox, right? It wouldn't have told us about fire. It would have said that if you own an ox and the ox gores or eats something, then all of a sudden a new case came in. A new case came in and it's called fire. Now, my neighbor's going to run to court and he's going to argue just like all of you people argued, right? All of you people argued, no, the guy started the fire and he was the one and it should have been reasonable to know that the wind was coming and all of these things. Then you hire a good attorney, and a good, smart attorney, a Dershowitz or something like that, and he gets into court and he twists it around. Why is your barn so close to the fence? If your barn would have been a little further, then you would have been not responsible. All of these things. And who says the fire belongs to the individual? Fire is not you can't own a fire where you can take it with you. It has no ruach chayim. It has no living breath. So therefore I could possibly make an argument why fire should not be responsible for compensation. No. So the Torah says, it could be that, convoluted in their thinking, the Jews would have come to this conclusion. So I'm telling you right now that if you start a fire and then, and you burn down someone else's barn, you are responsible, because even though it's not in your domain, the sparks flew out of your domain, you're still responsible. And that's also true for any kind of damages that do what? Travel. Right? So if I want to join the archery team for the US Olympics, and I'm practicing in my yard, and I have a bow and arrow, and I'm about as clumsy as, the guy that knows nothing about archery, and I fly, and I put the arrow, and it flies, and it kills the guy's prized dove, or whatever it is. Now I say to myself, I shot the arrow. Once the arrow was out in the public, what can I do about it? I can't go and retrieve the arrow. The arrow's flying, and it flew into someone else's domain, and it did some damage. Am I going to be responsible? Yes. Why? Because that's a tributary of fire. Everything that travels is a tributary of fire. Okay, the judge disagrees. I'm not going to get into it.
Now, I disagree in this manner.
Yes.
The factor that you talked about before, of course, is in our common law too, and that's foreseeability. It may not be foreseeable that if you light a fire correctly and the wind comes along and it's not the windy time of the year, and it takes, I was a lawyer for a long time.
Yes.
Okay. So, but if you shoot an arrow, Isn't it foreseeable that something's going to
Okay.
happen to the arrow?
Yes,
Why would it not be
yes,
foreseeable if
yes,
it's on that
absolutely.
fire?
So therefore,
No,
in a case,
If you lit the fire.
so in a case,
Yeah.
so you're right, in a case, the Talmud
It
is
is
gonna
not
now
the same.
bifurcate, it's gonna split the cases of when a wind is, it's windy season, or
Right.
if all of a sudden, there's
The
no
wind
way you
came up.
could have foreseen it, a wind comes in, and then you would not be responsible. Yeah, that is correct, that the
Okay.
Gemara is gonna bifurcate
Okay.
these kind of cases. Now, but believe me, by the time we finish 110 pages, we are going to go through every single possible scenario of damage. But every possible scenario of damage, even kind of damages that are not going to fit exactly into, one of these four categories. Like today, take for example today, the issue that there's no way we could have come up with is the computer, damages through the computer, identity theft, all of these things which don't fit directly into one of these kind of categories. There's no examples that come up all of the time, and this is the responsibility of the Beth Din to sit down and try to figure out, is this a kind of a category of goring? Is this an excitable? Because it makes a huge difference. If it's considered goring, I only have to pay 50%. Is it a kind of a damage like fire, which I pay 100%? Or is it a kind of a damage that is, like the judge mentioned, it was impossible to foresee beforehand, and therefore would make me exempt from paying any kind of damages. So it's very, very important for us to understand how each case would fit into these general categories. But you could see what the Mishnah is trying to say here is that we're going to be arguing that each one of these cases has to be enumerated in the Torah. That just one general statement, all damages are liable for payment, are not. No.
Preventability, we go back to the nature of an ox. An ox, you say, well, oxen are capable of goring, fires are capable. So how much preparation are you supposed to have your ox all the way tied? Were you supposed to have a fire extinguisher or a bucket of water
Yes.
or preparation ahead of time for to take care of possibilities? Have a shovel, have just, is possibilities a part of the,
Probabilities. Yes, probabilities.
Yeah.
Sure. If you're going to start a fire, you have to make all types of different. You have to set up different preventive measures. Not to do any damage. Okay. So now we have three of the four that are established. What? We have the ox, the two sections of the ox. We also have the section of the fire, and now we have the fourth category that we don't know about. Let's see what happens over here. Then he says like this: V'loi zeh v'zeh, and neither of these cases, not the goring, not the eating, not the fire, they have one thing in common. They have a common denominator, and that is shedarkon leilech ulahazik. They walk and they move and they travel to do damage. Everybody, you don't have to be the biggest chacham, you don't have to be Rabbi Akiva, you don't have to be Rabbi Gamliel to understand that if you make a fire, that fire could cause damage. That's the way it works. If I have a fire and I send it going, it's going to cause damage. You don't have to be the biggest rabbi. Karei Abar are unlike the pit, she'ein darkei leilech ulahazik. It doesn't move, it doesn't go, its habit is not to move and to do damage. A pit stays there. Now, I could make another argument why a pit should not be liable. Why? You should have watched out. The pit didn't come and get you. See, fire, it's impossible to do anything, right? It's an impossibility to prevent yourself from being damaged by the fire. It's impossible. But a pit, you're walking in the street. Okay, so I dug a pit. Okay, I made a little furrow, a burrow in the ground. I made a little ditch. So it's your fault. You should have been watching, right? You should have been watching. And we're going to go into a number of different scenarios. If I put down, let's say, a pitcher on the middle of the street. I put a pitcher in the middle of the street. Like I walked by and he tripped over the pitcher and he slipped. Who's responsible? Should the guy have been watching? Should the guy not? What exactly is a responsibility in a public domain? Whose responsibility is it? Now there are some times, I still remember this like it was yesterday. I was probably around 10 years old, as mentioned to you. We started learning the third chapter of Baba Kama. Third chapter of Baba Kama is all dealing with these damages in public domains. If a guy puts down a pitcher, a guy drops it. There's a case there where, let's say for example, during the year we have a huge industry called the oil industry. So everybody, we know it, for 3 weeks, everybody from around the country comes to Long Beach to gather oil, to squeeze oil. And the city has designated, downtown Pine and the whole Pine district as olive processing district. Now, would that be different when I walk in the street and I trip over a pitcher? Is that different than if I walk and trip over a pitcher here? Of course it is.
Yeah.
Why? Because I should have, I'll never forget. It was the first time I met the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I came in, I was 10 years old, the Rebbe was there, me and my father walked into his office, he was sitting behind his desk, and he looks at me, he says, so what are you learning? I said, Baba Kama. My father words were coming out, I'm like, Baba Kama. What does it say in Baba Kama? So I told him that this guy, about a pitcher. Then the Rebbe asked me like this, he says, well, if a guy puts a pitcher down on the street, and he trips over it, who's responsible? So I thought I was a big chacham, and I said, well, it depends, if the city allows you put the pitcher in the street, then you're not responsible. So the Rebbe looked at me and said, if you would be the mayor of the city. So I always thought I would go into politics for some odd reason. Because the Rebbe said, if you'll be the mayor, little did I know that mayor also means a carrot in Yiddish, but that's a different point. Okay, a mayor in Yiddish. So he said, if you would be the mayor of a city, this was in Yiddish, of course, if you would be the mayor of a city, would you allow people to put buckets in middle of the street? So there's a case. The Rebbe is referring to a case where, for example, it's the olive squeezing season. But I was so nervous, I thought, then I came up with it, and the Rebbe smiled at us, so I passed the first thing. Of course, it was that stuck in my mind so many, for so long, and so Baba Kama always was, when we get to Ameliches Akkad, when we get to the 3rd chapter, we're going to discuss this in great detail, whether a mayor is allowed to tell the city to put the bucket, in the city. But you could know, why I brought this up, is that there are certain circumstances that you're going to be allowed to, and certain circumstances you're not going to be allowed to. Okay? But you could make a very strong case for a pit not to be liable for damages. Why? Because it doesn't do anything. So I dug a pit. So what? You, chacham, walking in the street, what are you looking like this, thinking about the Talmud or thinking about Chassidus? You should have been keeping your eyes open, and you would have seen that the pit you wouldn't have fallen into the pit. So the Torah says no.
But if it was nighttime?
Oh, that's a good question. So nighttime. So maybe we could say nighttime you're responsible, daytime you're not responsible. So therefore the Torah says no. You are going to be responsible. If you made the damage, you're going to. What's another case for a pit? Tell me another case for a pit.
Maybe an ox was running after me.
Oh, if an ox was running after you, fell into the pit, and you got gored by the ox, so you're going to get double damages. It's going to be double damages. You're going to get, and you burned yourself. Oh, there you go. Then you win the trifecta. If you burn yourself while falling in the pit, while being gored by an ox, then you get all the damages. But what's another case of a pit? What would be another case of a pit? See, we talked about a case of a fire as one of the principal categories. The derivatives would be an arrow flying. What would be another case, a derivative of a pit?
A big rock?
Good, perfect. A big rock, a knife. Someone leaves a knife in a public domain, and someone comes and trips themselves, and they cut their tuchus on the knife with the pants and everything. Okay, straight out from the record. They cut their pants. Okay, on the knife. So if you left your rock, or if you left a knife, or if you left your backpack, anything that would cause public nuisance in the public domain. It's not private. I'm allowed to do whatever I want in my yard, because I want to dig a pit, I want to leave a knife. That's no problem. Fire is different, because fire moves. Okay.
So a pit then is anything stationary?
Exactly. Anything that is stationary and that's not alive. Okay? It has to be stationary glass.
I walk through a glass.
Exactly.
It's a pit.
That's what it is.
Because I didn't see it wasn't well done.
That's what it is. If you put glass in a public domain, if you walk through my glass door in my house, I'm not responsible for you. But if you all of a sudden,
I'm a guest in your home and you didn't light your living room, and I went out to go have a cigarette on your patio, and boom, I walked.
That only happens because it's lawyers.
Well, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, God's punishing you for having.
No. That only happens in the United States because we have lawyers. So lawyers will come to court and they'll say, you know what, the thief, got run out of the house, and my Doberman pincher took a bite out of his tuchus, rightfully so, the guy's suing me. Because the Doberman picture, only in America could he win.
Yeah.
Okay, it comes into my, but in the time of the Talmud, it had to be in the public domain. If you went into my house and you were my guest, shame on you. You should have seen, you should have seen the glass door.
Should have known that. He's gonna have a horse.
Exactly. So now the Gemara is going to say like this. Okay, so we have a rationale for all four different categories why there is a responsibility for damages. Okay, we have to think. This is Talmud. This is not. We're not talking about history here. You have to put your head to it. So we got the shur, the goring, only pays half damages. We don't know that yet, but I'm just telling you. I'm giving you a little preview because the ox got nervous under this. Okay, second. Is the shur habar the pit, because I made a public nuisance, therefore I'm going to pay. The tooth damages, the pleasurable damages, is because the ox walks, I should have been able to guard it, and the maver and the fire. Okay, so the Mishnah says like this: Hatzada shovish shebenayim. The common denominator that all four of these categories have. What is the common denominator? Shedarkon lahazik. Their nature is to do damage. Doesn't mean that they go out to do damage, but a pit is gonna damage. If you're gonna do a pit, it's gonna damage somebody. Someone's gonna fall into that pit. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. Okay? Ushmirasam olecha, and the responsibility of guarding all of those four categories is upon you, if you own it. So think about this for a second. Here's where the Torah comes up with an unbelievable theory. What is it? If a guy makes a pit in the public domain, he's going to argue, how can I be responsible for guarding it? It's not mine. I can't own the public domain. It's public property. So if I made a pit, why is the guarding upon me? It's public. I don't own it. If you tell me my fire, I own the fire. It's my go, it's my ox, I own my ox. But you can't own. And if I make a pit here and tonight we go out, we decide we're going to test this out. Okay? So Mark goes and buys a jackhammer. We go out there, all 20 of us. We were all standing around while we make a big hole on PCH. Does that mean that we own the hole in PCH?
No, but you damage the public domain.
What?
You damage the public.
Oh, so one thing, damaging the public domain is not what I'm talking about over here. These are not damages to public domain. That's a separate issue. That the mayor and the city council have to take you to court. The attorney general will get you.
People can hurt
What?
themselves.
Oh, so people are going to be able to hurt themselves. So I argue, why should I be responsible? It doesn't belong to me. You can't. So what the Torah said is, even though it doesn't belong to you, we all admit that I can't set up a show. If I build myself now a little barricade and I put a detour and on PCH, we gonna be able to do that? Like, and then not let anybody drive in the right-hand lane except me. I'm gonna go out there with paint, Perelmuter only. I mean, it's going to be crazy. No, it's going to be insane to think about that. So even though what the Torah is saying here, think about this for a moment. Even though that it doesn't belong to you, the public domain does not come into you, but the responsibility of guarding the potential damages is upon you. So therefore, so there's no way that you're going to argue that it doesn't belong to me, and I'm able to walk away from it. Because the Torah is able to do that because it makes the rules and regulations. So for example, I'll give you another example. Last time when we talked about lashes, we talked about one particular mitzvah that everybody knows about, and that's Pesach, right? There's a prohibition called Chometz b'Pesach. You're not supposed to eat a bagel on Pesach. Not only you're not supposed to eat a bagel on Pesach, you're not even supposed to own a bagel on Pesach. Forget about eating it. Even if you own a bagel on Pesach, you've transgressed on the mitzvah of Bal Yiro or Bal Yamotzim, of owning it and seeing it in your house. Okay? Then the Torah does what we call a double whammy on you. What is the punishment? The punishment for owning chametz on Pesach, this punishment is, what did we say last time? Cut off. We cut off. Exorcism, right? We cut you off. You're exorcised from the Jewish people. Bye-bye. Yet, it doesn't belong to you. Chametz that you owned after Pesach, if you owned a bagel while Pesach came in, that bagel is prohibited from having any pleasure past Pesach. You can't have any pleasure from that bagel. You can't feed it to your dog. You can't give it to your neighbor. You have to burn it. You have to get rid of it. You can't have any pleasure. So here's where the Torah is giving you a double whammy. On one hand, the Torah says you're going to be liable for the punishment. You're going to get lashes if you did whatever the case was, or you're going to get exorcism, whatever the case may be. And at the same time, you don't even own it. So I should say to God, you know what? At least you're going to punish me for this. At least let me have a bagel with cream cheese. Something, let me own the bagel. The Torah says, no. I take away the ownership, but I leave the punishment. Okay, that's a double whammy that you get. And the same thing is true here in the public domain. You don't own that pit. That pit doesn't belong to you. You can't charge for going down and seeing the pit. If you strike water, the water doesn't belong to you. Nothing, it doesn't have any, but the only thing that you're responsible for is shmirasan alecha. The guarding of that pit against any types of damages is squarely on your shoulder. Squarely on your shoulder. Now it says, okay. Then came Shabbos. The mother was already hysterical. She didn't know what to do. She went to doctors. The baby's refusing to eat. And these are the days prior to feeding by bottle. I mean, the mother was nursing. There's no bottles, and the mother is hysterical. So there was in this town of Dvinsk. In the town of Dvinsk, small town in Poland, there were two unbelievable great geniuses, which happened many times in pre-Europe, pre-World War II in Europe. One was the Rogatchover, Rabbi Yosef Rosen, who was a kind of a Hasidic Rav, and then there was another the Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. He was a Litvish. Two rabbis that were in the city. So if you were Litvish, you went to Meir Simcha. If you were Hasidic, you went to the Rogatchover. This lady came to the Rogatchover, and she said to the Rogatchover, I don't know what to do. So he said to her, go put on your weekday clothing. Go put on your weekday clothing. She put on her weekday clothing, the baby nursed. So she came back to the Rogatchover and she said to him, what does this have to do with it? Why the weekday clothing? She says, I'll tell you, there's a case in the Talmud in Baba Kama. I told you that if an ox gets nervous for 3 times, right? And then the 4th time, how much does it have to pay? Full damages, right? Why? Because the first time it tells you that I'm a little excitable. Second time I tell you I'm a little excitable. Third time I'm a little excitable. What happens if the 4th time happens on Shabbos? The ox is not responsible. Why? The rabbi said why? Because on Shabbos, everybody looks different. It has different clothing. They look nicer. The ox was discombobulated. The guy went out in the street. He saw all these fancy people with their fancy clothing. It gored them. The rabbi said you can't consider the 4th goring part of a pattern because it's not. He said, what happened here with the baby? Tuesday, the baby nursed because you're wearing regular clothes. Wednesday, the baby nursed. Thursday was Yom Tov. It was Sukkot. So the mother put on Yom Tov clothing. She put on Yom Tov clothing. The baby got nervous. It didn't recognize the mother's smell because she was wearing different clothing. He refused to eat. Then he said, came Friday. She was still the 2nd day of Yom Tov. The baby refused to eat. Came the 3rd day of Yom Tov. The Rogatchover says, put back on your regular clothing. The baby will recognize you. It will feel comfortable, and it's going to nurse. All right. So when we think about the Talmud, these hypothetical questions and these things, there's always a practical application that if you're smart enough. I mean, the Rogatchover was brilliant. I mean, these two rabbis. I mean, you can't even imagine. In America, it's sad because you just don't have this kind of complete devotion to Talmud. I mean, these two rabbis, both of them easily knew the Talmud like the back of their hand. Like I would know the pasuk Shema Yisrael. That's the way they knew the Talmud. As a matter of fact, they used the legends were when they would meet on the street, they would discuss half of the Talmud in a conversation. One would get a case, another case, back and forth. They said one time the Rabbi Simcha caught the Rogatchover. He asked him a question he didn't know. Oh, so he couldn't take it. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, he finally figured it out. He came running, he was banging on his window. He said, hey, Rabbi simply woke him up in the middle of the night. I found the answer. I found the answer. So, you're talking about people whose entire lives, we're not talking about that this was like kind of a hobby, when you come home at night and you study, but their entire lives were completely dedicated to the study of the Torah. And they both wrote monumental works. I mean, it's unbelievable. And today, this is one of the things that Hitler finished off. That whole kind of dedication. Even though we have a tremendous amount of scholarship now in the world, you go to Israel, thousands of people are studying. You go to America, to New York, thousands of people are studying. Lakewood, many scholars coming out. But you know what? There's a difference when it was a shtetl. In a shtetl there was no internet, in a shtetl there was no cable, in a shtetl there was no New York Times or LA Times or Washington Post or Washington Times or the New Republic or the old, there was nothing to distract you. All these people knew was just Torah scholarship. That's all they were interested in. They didn't leave town, they didn't travel around the world. This is their entire life, from morning to night. And as they said, the Vilna Gaon was a 20-hour a day, he studied. Slept maybe 2-3 hours a day. The rest of the time was completely devoted to studying. Listen, when you don't have, I've often argued, if you don't have a country that you have to govern, like, Jews haven't had a country for 2,000 years, you have a lot of time on your hands to develop these tremendous scholars. So they're unbelievable. Okay, let's continue the Mishnah. And then the Mishnah says, and when a damage does occur, now when you're going to do a damage, Chav Hamazik, the damager is responsible, L'shalem, to pay, Tashlume Nezek, the amount of the damage, to indemnify, B'meitav ha'aretz, with the best of his estate. Now, what does that mean with the best of his estate? Okay, today it's a little bit different because most of the time when you pay damage, you pay money. I mean, if the court tells you $1,000, you write a check, $1,000. In those days, money wasn't the only currency that we dealt with. People dealt in 3 types of currencies. One was cash. So what was cash? They were basically coins that the kings had, so they had some kind of value. They only had value if the king was still around. If the Roman emperor changed and and you had 50 Caligulas, and today was Nero's day, can you help with the Caligulas? You could send them back to Rome. So cash wasn't exactly a great commodity because you never knew who's going to be the next guy. As a matter of fact, someone had recently, they showed me. They either was in Shul or something that they had actually coins from Bar Kokhba revolt. From Bar Kokhba's revolt, they had coins. It was unbelievable, and the coins were imprinted on top of Roman coins because they didn't have enough to get their own coins, so they imprinted them. They found some coins from the Romans, from whether it was Hadrian or Trajan or whoever was the emperor, and on those coins on top of it they imprinted a Bar Kokhba coin. So that was one money, kesef, money, metaltalin, movable objects. So I had animals, I had things in my house, grain, the utensils, a stove, those kind of things. And third was land. Land was a commodity that people owned land. So now I come to court and I did damage to Bob. I did damage to him, and now we come to court, and they rule according to that I'm responsible to pay damages to Bob. I don't have any cash, and I don't have any metaltalin. I don't have any movable objects. All I have is land. So I say, okay, so give him $200 worth of land. Okay, $200 worth of land. So I think to myself, I have 3 pieces of land. I own a house in Beverly Hills. I own a house in Compton. And I own a house in Bixby Knolls. Okay? 3 houses. So what am I going to do? I look at Bob and I think to myself, I say, Baruch Hashem. Yeah, I say, you know what? You're getting the Compton house. I give him $200 worth. I said, you now own the front porch of my Compton house. Okay? Well, wonderful, no, great. I'm a nice guy. The court ordered me to pay $200 with no. So Bob was going to come back to the court and say, you know what? This shmegegi, took me. I went to look at the land. The land is in the middle of Compton. So if I have to collect my $200, I got to go to Compton. It's in. So the Mishnah says, no. What you're going to pay if you damaged is you're going to pay the meitav sadeu, from the best of your estate. So the court sends out an estimator and they go around. So I'm not talking about real estate properties, but this was actual fertile land. So if you had, for example, a field next to a brook, it's going to be worth a lot more than a field that's on a hill, right? How are you going to plant on a field on a hill? It's impossible. So I want to give Bob $200 of my field on the hill. Go, now you own a hill. No. They're going to say you're going to give him from the best. So even if I own 3 fields, one next to each other, but the first field is next to the brook, which is worth the most money. Then the middle field is worth a little bit less, and the last field is worth much less because it's much further away. Have to dig a whole irrigation ditch to get to the last field. I'm going to have to give him from the best of my property. That means he has a right to choose. If he wants to take the choicest part right next to the stream, that's his. Unlike, why does the Mishnah have to tell us this? Because there's going to be other cases that we're going to encounter. For example, if I have to pay off, and I hate to use this example right now, but I'm just going to, if you have to pay off your ketubah, okay? Means, under the chuppah, we sign the ketubah, right? The husband, and what does the ketubah say? The ketubah says, man, that the husband is going to treat his wife, he's going to love her and cherish her till whatever. But if he doesn't love her and doesn't cherish her and he doesn't do anything, what's going to happen? At the end of it, if the marriage splits, the husband is going to pay, baby. He is going to pay. And it even says in the ketubah, even the shirt off his back, glimim al kasvoi. You have to take the shirt off the back, okay? So now the marriage dissolved. Okay, the woman comes to court and she says, "My husband has to pay up." And they look at the ksuba. Now today, it's basically a formal standard ksuba because it does exactly what the damages are. But in the olden days, you could negotiate your ketubah. Right? I mean, if you came from a fancy family and he really wanted to marry you and he was chasing you, you could say, "You put in that ksuba that I'm going to get $1,000, 1,000 ounces of silver if you divorce me." Okay, now I come to court and I present the document to the rabbis. The rabbis read the document. They say, "Okay, pay her up. I have no cash. You have no cash. What do you have? I have land." Okay, I don't have to pay from the best of the land. I get to choose which land I pay off the ketubah. So here it's a little bit different. Here in the case of damages, the damagee gets to pick which what they want. The damager is going to just sit there like that and going to take it.
Wait, and it's always the man who decides.
What do you mean? No. In the case of the ketubah, it's different than the damager.
Yeah.
It's the husband could say, "I'm not going to give you from the best. I'm not going to give you from the worst." She gets from the babies.
See, because she's a woman.
No, it has nothing to do with being a woman. It has to do because damages is a lot more, because in the case of the ketubah, they could say, "Listen, go 50, he has to give her from the middle, not from the best, not from the worst. He has to give her baininess. He has to give her the middle. Because in damages, we put the responsibility, the onus is on you 100%. 100%. What if the wife was a machshefa? What if the wife was a witch? And she didn't want to cook anything, she didn't want to do anything. And divorce, what? No, I'm just saying, she didn't want to do anything. She didn't want to have any relations with him. She made his life miserable. She just absolutely did nothing.
What if she came from
If he was the machshef?
Yeah?
Yes.
So
They go to court.
they go to court and he has to give her the baininess. He has to give her from the middle. Middle bound. Not the best, not the worst, the middle. Damages, you did something wrong. You did something wrong. Because you did something wrong, we're gonna give you an extra burden of responsibility to pay from the best of the land.
Falling out of love is kind of a neutral thing. If he were to,
If he was to hurt her, that's different.
That's different.
No, that's different. That's different. Falling out of love and divorcing, but if he physically being, to hurt her, that's a damage. That's damaging her.
Right.
So we can't just send her away for burning the food. Or
What?
boiling the water.
Oh, you know what? That's very interesting that you say that. Because just Reb Meir of Lublin was a great person. Today we study what we call the Daf Yomi. There's many people that study 1 page of Talmud a day. They go through literally a page a day. And it takes 7 years to finish the Talmud. This is called the Daf Yomi project. A daf a day, 1 page a day, there's 2,500 pages. Every 7 years, the cycle goes. They just finished now the 10th cycle. The 10th cycle was just finished now. So he started this 70 years ago. 70 years ago. All right? He was a brilliant guy, but he was also, besides being a brilliant visionary and get people to study, because he knew how many people are able to study all day, at least at night when you come home study. My father, later on in life, went through 3 cycles, 21 years he spent. My mother wanted to kill him. It was a miracle he lived 21 years. And she wanted to go out, I got to go to the class. For 21 years he went through 3 cycles. And I was amazed. I used to come and there was 50 men And of course, there was no women in this class. It was 50, it was very traditional Montreal yeshiva and was very orthodox. So about 50 men would come every night, and the rabbis would sit there and they would go through page by page the eve of Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur. You know, they were very, very loyal to this. Of course, they missed sometimes, I mean, obviously. But so he, besides being a visionary, a brilliant visionary, what he was also was a great fundraiser, a tremendous fundraiser. One day he came into someone's office because he had this yeshiva in Lublin that he was raising money for. And he said to him, you know what? You know, I want you to take a donation. The guy said, Meir, I'm really sorry. I had a very bad year. I can't give you anything. So Meir said to him, okay, you know what? He got very angry, which is so against his personality, and said, I don't want you to write any letters to me. I don't want you to do anything to me. I don't want you to come to advice to me. I want to cut our relationship off right now. Finished. The philanthropist was shocked. You know, he goes, well, Meir, you know, I mean, listen, you know, I didn't mean to insult you. I mean, I just said, like, you know, listen, I'm a fundraiser. I know many people say, listen, it's been a tough year. I can't do it. I never have that kind of a reaction. I say basically, maybe next year you should be better, you know, do that. The guy says, why this kind of violent reaction? He says, I'll tell you why. Because it says in the Talmud like this, when can you divorce a woman? It says, under what circumstances can you divorce a woman? So there's three arguments. One argument is, Rabbi Beis Hillel says that if you find, Beis Shammai says, if she does something wrong, right? She does an immoral act. Rabbi Akiva says if he finds someone nicer than her, and that's Rabbi Akiva. And Beis Hillel says if she burnt his food, okay, she burnt his food. So he says like this, okay. So the Rabbi is explaining to him like this. Let's analyze this for a moment, okay. Beis Shammai says if he found an immoral act. That's absolutely, I mean, if she's going out with someone else, you know, so that's absolutely grounds for divorce. Rabbi Akiva says, if he finds someone better than her, like you mentioned before, you fall out of love. You know, I married someone at 22, she was beautiful. At 42, she don't look like she's 22. You know, we all.
Neither does he.
Right away, he's a retort. This is a story. Okay? Oh, I'm telling you. That's it. That's judges and lawyers, I'm telling you. Okay, so therefore, I'm just talking about from a man's perspective. Okay? So she doesn't look the same as she looked, neither does he. Okay? All right? And Charlotte likes it. I'm telling you, Charlotte is enjoying this. I'm telling you this. Okay? So then you could understand it. People fall out of love, they divorce. Fine, there doesn't have to be a whole tumult. You know, what if they married at 21? Forget about looks. Their interests. You know, one guy, or there's a million different scenarios you could understand. But Beis Hillel's argument, if she burnt his food, what kind of, because someone had mentioned, I think Ted mentioned burning the food. No, that's how it's burned up. So, burning the food, that should be a reason for divorcing the wife. How could that possibly be? So he said, so Rabbi Meir looked at the philanthropist and explained it. He said like this, if you look closely, there's three types of women. What is it? The first woman burns the food. You know what she does? She burns half the dish. She takes the burnt part for herself. She gives the good part for her husband. Oh, this is a tzaddikus. Yeah. This is a righteous woman. Right. There's another part, the other woman burns half of the food. She figures, you know what? She'll take half of the burnt and half of the good and give the husband half of the good and half of the burnt. Okay, she's a middleman, normal woman. Then there's the one that says, you know what? I burned the food. Because the Mishnah says, remember clearly the words, she burnt his food. Right? His food, it says. So what does she do? She burns half the food, she takes the better part for herself, and she gives him the burnt part. When Hillel says, because Hillel was a nice guy. I mean, there's a million stories in the Talmud of how patient he was, how kind he was. He says, such a woman that burns the food, takes the good part for herself, and gives the burnt part for her husband, such a woman you could divorce. Hillel says, such a woman you could divorce, because she's mean. He says like this, look at you. This is Rabbi Meir telling the philanthropist. There are people who have a bad year and they say, what, you know what? I'm going to take the loss. Or a mayor is going to come in, I'm still going to give him my donation, I'm going to take the loss. Even that's a tzaddik. That's a righteous person. Then there are those that say, you know what, I took a loss. Last year I gave $500, I'll give him $250. Okay, so that is, that's a normal person. I take a loss, you take a loss. Then there's those guys that had a bad year and you take the entire loss. Such a person, Hill says, I want nothing to do with him. That's why he got nervous. Oh, when the guy heard that from the mayor, he wrote him a check right there and then he gave him some money. So even within, what I'm saying is, even within the idea of the Talmud, you also have to analyze every single word, because it doesn't say she burnt the food. She burnt his food. The one that takes the good part for herself and gives the husband the burnt part. That's the one you want. That's the one you want to get rid of. All right.
My husband likes the burnt part.
Oh, you see, Charlotte they would throw out of the academy just for that they would throw. Not because her husband likes this.
Yes, to me many times. I'll eat it.
Like Mark said, how many years did it take you to train him that way? No, it's like the guy who got married. Every dish the wife put out, he didn't like. Every dish she made filet mignon, he didn't like. She made beef Wellington, he didn't like. Every fancy dish she wouldn't slate. Oh, it was kosher and yosher, and it was glad kosher. Finally, one day, he always said, it's not like my mother's, it's not like my mother's. One day she burnt the toast, and she put it there, just like my mother's. Just like my mother's. Okay? This is the beginning. This is the Mishnah. Next week we'll pick it up at the Talmud. Okay? If there's any questions for the Mishnah right now, but I want you, for those who have taken, notes, please keep the notes, because next week we're going to get into, a whole different kind of study, and it's going to be good.
Regarding the Gemara,
You know what, I don't remember.
Yeah.
$7,000.
I had a bad year.
Go ahead.
what is the last sentence referring to?
The last sentence, you mean where?
On the English, regarding defilement.
Defilement, the primary defilement, the dead reptile and the semen virile. We're talking about things that in the olden days, semen was a something that was transmitted, was rendered a person impure, spiritually impure. So if a person had sexual relationship, or if he had gonorrhea, if he had all different things, that I'm going to explain that when we get to that part. I'll explain all of the different ways that a person could become spiritually impure. For a long time, just like women had to go to the mikveh, men had to go to the mikveh as well. So like, for example, a woman who had menstrual period, that rendered her spiritually impure. The same thing if a guy had whatever disease, like we've learned a number of times. But let's wait for that. We're just going to it's going to take us a little while.
Can't go have beer next week. Have to come back to here.